So welcome back, Optimancers. We are now in our third video where we're going to be talking about this character from levels 11 through 20. If you haven't seen the parts before this, you probably do. I would start with levels 1 through 4 and then 5 through 10. There's going to be links for those down below. They're in the video description. They're also in the comments section. But for those who've already watched those parts, here's our third part. Let's talk about high-level blasting. So we're going to go to level 11 with this character. So when it comes to blasting at 6th level, especially if we're just talking about evocation spells, I think there's two main options here. The first one is Chain Lightning, and the second one is Autoluke's Freezing Sphere. Now, Chain Lightning does decent damage, and the nice thing about Chain Lightning is we're picking our targets. Well, Autoluke's Freezing Sphere is just a big area kaboom, but it has a potential secondary effect of sticking our enemies in place. So the thing about Chain Lightning is actually I like it more for non-evokers because it doesn't really need sculpt spells. Autoluke's Freezing Sphere does need sculpt spells, so I tend to like it more for an evocation wizard, and so that is the blast I'm going to take at this level. So this spell has a 300-foot range, so we can cast it a long way away. Frigid Globe of Cold Energy streaks from your fingertips to a point of your choice within range, where it explodes in a 60-foot radius sphere. That is 120 feet across. That is insanely huge. So we can hit an army with this that's in combat with our party and exclude our party, and we can hit just massive quantities of enemies here. This is the kind of spell we want to cast, again, when the enemies are covering a massive area, or maybe they've been inconvenient and thought they would be clever by not clustering. Well, tough, 120 feet across, we're still going to get y'all. Now, the damage is so-so. It's 10d6 damage for this level, not great damage. In fact, if we were to upcast a fireball, we would do 11d6 damage. But again, I would never use this spell if I'm only going to hit as many people as I could hit with a fireball. Then I'm always going to cast the fireball. But this is for hitting much more enemies, or enemies that are much more spread out. Now this is where we really also want to take advantage of this. If the globe strikes a body of water or a liquid that is principally water, it freezes the liquid to a depth of 6 inches over a 30-foot square. The ice, so that's not, I should mention, a 30-foot square is not nearly the entire area of this spell. We're picking an area within the total area of this spell. The ice lasts for 1 minute. Creatures that were swimming on the surface of the frozen water are trapped in the ice. A trapped creature can use its action to make a strength check against your spell DC to break free. So we can use this to freeze enemies in place, and then they have to use their strength against our spell DC to try to break free. And we could potentially hold them for up to a minute. Now I want to talk a little bit about the last feature of this spell, because there's a bit of a trap here. You can refrain from firing the globe after completing the spell. A small globe about the size of a sling stone, cool to the touch, appears in your hand. At any time, you or a creature you give the globe to can throw the globe with a range of 40 feet or hurl it with a sling to the sling's normal range. It shatters on impact with the same effect as the normal casting of the spell. Now, do you remember what I said about the area of effect of this spell? 60-foot radius, 120 feet across. So if you throw this 40 feet, you are automatically within the area of this spell. So that's a good way to get you and your party hit in your own area of effect. Now, does sculpt spells work if we use the spell this way? Well, I would really be talking to the DM first. Technically, the way that sculpt spells reads is when you cast a spell, you choose creatures you can see up to this certain number based on the level, and when they make a saving throw versus that spell, they automatically succeed, and if they would normally take half damage, they take no damage. So rules as written, potentially you could choose the rest of your party when you cast this spell, have them automatically make their saving throw, then you hand it off to anybody, they throw it at their feet when you are far away because you are not protected from this spell, and then that 40-foot range isn't a problem. But your DM may not let you do it that way, and I totally understand why your DM might not let you do it that way, because I don't think it fits the intention that you are picking areas that are not being affected, that are filled with creatures you can see. And of course, you can't see into the future, so you don't know what those areas would be. So don't expect your DM to allow you to do that, though there is reason to think that a DM might allow you to do that. So it's definitely worth asking. But if you can't do it that way, then throwing that is awful. And it's a bit of a trap, or I don't know if they increased the radius afterwards and didn't think about it when they wrote this part of it, because certainly if you're not an evoker, you're definitely going to be hit with your own effect. But the thing is, you can hurl it with a sling, so get a sling. And if you give somebody the Autoluke's Freezing Sphere, give them the sling too. The sling will give them a 120-foot range, so that's plenty to get out of the 60-foot radius. The final thing is they can place it in a space without exploding it, and then they can move away, and 1 minute later it automatically takes effect. So there's a lot of different tactical things here. Using it over water, giving it to another party member, and then having them use a sling, or leaving it there as something that's going to explode later. The damage, again, for the level isn't all that spectacular, but I think there's enough things here that make this a pretty interesting spell. But in a case where I'm in a combat and I have a bunch of clustered enemies, and I can hit just as many with a fireball as an Autoluke's Freezing Sphere, and I don't think that they're resistant or immune to fire, I would always do a fireball over the Autoluke's Freezing Sphere, unless they're in water. And then the second spell I'm going to take is Contingency. Now, I do not have Thunderstep or Dimension Door or Autoluke's Resilient Sphere with this character, so I might have them. Again, I'm making these characters worst case scenario, where we are assuming there are no additional spells from spell books or scrolls or anything. Now, if you've picked up Dimension Door or Thunderstep, those are both good choices for contingency. If you've got Autoluke's Resilient Sphere, that's a reasonable choice as well. With this character, probably what I would do is I would combine it with a Fire Shield. And then I would say, whenever I take fire or cold damage, a Fire Shield comes up. And that way I can have the Fire Shield up for the remainder of the combat. It's not using my concentration. It's not using up my reaction. So with preparations, it's pretty easy here because, again, we don't have to prepare contingency when we're going on adventures. It's something we do when we're not adventuring. So we only have to prepare our Autoluke's Freezing Sphere, so there's no tough decisions for us here. Now, as I mentioned, Autoluke's Freezing Sphere isn't always going to be our best spell. It's our highest level blast, but it's more about the versatility of that spell. And if we can prepare, remember, we could give it to an ally, and then we could do a different blast, and then we can potentially combine those effects. But if I'm in a big battle, and I just want to hit with the biggest blast I can do, and the enemies are there, I'm not necessarily going to jump right to Autoluke's Freezing Sphere. Cone of Cold is usually going to do more damage. But if those enemies are way far apart, or I've had a chance to prepare and given this to somebody else, or they're in water, then there's a lot of reason why I might consider an Autoluke's Freezing Sphere. So going to level 12 here. Now we're going to be adding another ability score increase, and what we're going to be adding now is our intelligence up to 20. So I'm going to be able to select 2 additional spells. I'm going to take Wall of Ice. So Wall of Ice, again, this is not a spell I would take with a non-evoker. But this character, I've got Wall of Force for containing one enemy. But if I want to create a wall, there's a good reason why I might do a Wall of Ice instead of a Wall of Force. Because it does a reasonable amount of damage, 10d6 cold damage, and it can cover quite a large area. So we can hit a lot of enemies with this for damage, as well as getting the wall effect on top of that. This can often cause problems with friendly fire, but not for us. Not something I'm going to want to do in every fight, but certainly if I want to do Divide and Conquer on top of doing damage, then Wall of Ice gives me both of those things. And the other one I'm going to take is Mass Suggestion. So it's not a blast, but I've got lots of blast options. And it's a really powerful spell. And I've talked about it many times before. Doesn't use your concentration, can target a ton of creatures with a powerful effect. So tactically, we just have created more options for this character. And we're still going to be using Fireball a lot of the time. Now, Fireball isn't going to be dropping enemies anymore. In fact, it has a much lower effect on enemies. So we really only want to be using Fireball when we can hit lots of creatures, even in those secondary fights. Otherwise, just stick with a cantrip or grab Telekinesis and use it round after round. So I'm going to start jumping 2 levels at a time here. So 14th level brings us our final subclass ability, and this one is a doozy. So at 14th level, you can increase the power of your simpler spells. When you cast a wizard spell of 1st through 5th level. Now remember, we're 14th level. 5th level is not all that simple. That deals damage, and we have lots of those. You can deal maximum damage with that spell. The first time you do so, you suffer no adverse effect. If you use this feature again before you finish a long rest, you take 2d12 necrotic damage for each level of the spell immediately after you cast it. Each time you use this feature again before finishing a long rest, the necrotic damage per spell level increases by 1d12. This damage ignores resistance and immunity. When we're specializing in area of effect damage, this is huge. Just remember how huge something like a Cone of Cold is. It does 8d8 damage, so we can make it 64 points of damage. Even if they make their saving throw, they're going to take more than 30 points of damage from it. And those saving throws aren't easy to make because we have boosted our intelligence up to a 20. Though I should mention that a vitriolic sphere can actually do about 60 points of damage with this as well if we want to do acid damage, because it should affect both our initial damage and our second round damage. Do we ever want to use this more than once between long rests? I would avoid it like the plague. I really would. We don't have a ton of hit points, and that's a fair amount of damage to be taking. I mean, 2d12 damage per level of the spell. You're very potentially taking yourself down just by using it once. So it's more like a campaign ender, and you know what? My character's going to die anyway, so I'm taking you with me. That's the only reason I would ever use Overchannel more than once per long rest. But in normal adventuring, just pretend that you can't do it again. You can do it once per long rest. But when we do use it, it does increase the damage a lot that we can do with our spells. So we are going to pick 4 7th level spells because we're covering 2 levels here. I'm going to take Crown of Stars. So Crown of Stars gives us a bonus action attack. Does 4d12 radiant damage, but we can do it over an hour period up to 7 times. So potentially 7 times 4 is 28 d12 points of damage using our bonus action. Now it doesn't do area of effect damage, so this is kind of supplementary damage on top of something else we're doing. The second one I'm grabbing is Force Cage because I always pretty much take Force Cage with wizards. It's so good. It's kind of like Wall of Force, except even more so. If you make a wizard of this level and you're not taking Force Cage, it's going to make you a lot weaker than the wizards who do. The next one is Simulacrum. Again, obviously, this is one of the reasons we play a wizard, especially in a campaign where we know is going to go high level. And then the final one I'm going to take is Teleport. And I didn't take Thunderstep, and I didn't take Dimension Door, largely because I was small sized, and that limits what I can do with it. That limitation isn't in effect for Teleport. So if I do need to get the party out, Teleport is a way I can do it, and my size isn't going to be an issue. So I want to talk about my preparations at 14th level. So what I've got prepared right now, I've got Absorb Elements. I'm going to keep that right to level 20. Same with Mage Armor, same with Shield. Levitate is something I could get rid of at any time, but I still think there's utility value there. Still, sometimes just getting out of the fight is useful for us, and we still have a lot of higher level spells that don't require concentration, so we can do it in combination with them. So I think it's an okay thing to keep, but if I needed to get rid of a slot, it would probably be my first choice. Then I'm going to have Misty Step for my bonus action teleports. Counterspell, going to keep definitely to 20th level. Fireball, it's kind of the standard blast. At this level, it's not a big blast anymore, but it doesn't use a big resource, and we can potentially still hit lots of creatures. And if you can hit enough creatures, the damage still ends up being pretty good. Melf's Minute Meteors, same thing. Storm Sphere, again, we're going to be using this. It creates a little bit of battlefield control. It gives us something to do with our bonus action when we're using our regular action for something else. Vitriolic Sphere, as a 4th level straight blast, it's okay. Cone of Cold, same thing with 5th level. But again, these are both candidates for that over channel as well. Telekinesis, if we want to save spell slots and do something over a long period of time. Wall of Force can win a fight without providing a saving throw. We still want to keep that. Mass Suggestion, great spell. It's not evocation, so what? Autoluke's Freezing Sphere, I talked about that lots already. Wall of Ice, I talked about that lots of already. And then our new ones, Crown of Stars, Force Cage, and Teleport, and we don't need to prepare Simulacrum because we're going to be doing it when we're not adventuring. So not a lot of blasts with our 7th level spells. Crown of Stars, technically a blast. But for the most part, what we're doing is we're just increasing the versatility of this character. The Force Gauge to trap enemies and just win fights. Simulacrum to double our power. And Teleport, of course, because we had a bit of a gap in terms of being able to move around our allies. So we go to level 16, and we get another ability score improvement. We've already got our 20 intelligence, so of course we're going to take a feat here. Now, people might wonder about something like Spell Sniper. They might wonder about something like Elemental Adept. Again, I'm not focusing on one type of damage, so I don't see the point of that one spell. And then Spell Sniper, I'm not doing a lot of to-hit rolls. So I don't see a lot of value there either, because it can help you avoid cover, and adding another cantrip really is useless to us. So I think the two feats that really stand out are Alert for that bonus to initiative and the ability to avoid being surprised, and Lucky, because Lucky is good for any character. It's always versatile, can help you make those saving throws you otherwise would have failed. I'm going to take Alert here, but it could go either way. So we get a +5 to our initiative. We already had a dexterity of 16, so that's going to give us a total of +8. That's a really good initiative. Can't be surprised while we're conscious, and creatures don't get advantage on attack rolls against us as a result of being unseen by us. So we're going to get 4 8th level spells. I want to take Demi-Plane. I've talked about this before. It's something we can do outside of adventuring. It can be used as a way to store stuff, and we don't necessarily have to prepare it all the time. So then it's not going to eat up our valuable preparation slots, but it's really handy to have on our spellbook. So it's a good choice for any wizard where we're finding preparation slots kind of tight, which is most wizards. I'm going to take Maze, just because Maze is a very good spell. I've talked about it before. We have no specialty with it with this wizard. We're just going to use it like any other wizard. No wizard really has a benefit with Maze. It's good on its own. But there are 2 spells I'm going to take that are evocation spells that I normally wouldn't take. The first one is Maddening Darkness. So Maddening Darkness is a concentration spell, can last up to 10 minutes, can be cast at 150 feet, and it's massive. Magical darkness spreads from a point you choose within range to a 60-foot radius sphere, so it's as big as that Aluk's freezing sphere until the spell ends. The darkness spreads around corners. So this allows us to target some enemies we normally couldn't get to. A creature with dark vision can't see through this darkness. Non-magical light, as well as light created by spells of 8th level or lower, can't illuminate the area. So very few creatures are going to be able to cast a spell that is going to illuminate it. Shrieks, gibbering, and mad laughter can be heard within the sphere. Whenever a creature starts its turn in the sphere, it must make a wisdom saving throw. That's a target that we normally don't have with blasting wizards, taking 8d8 psychic damage on a failed save, or half as much damage on a successful one. So again, this is damage that we normally wouldn't be able to deliver, psychic damage, and a wisdom saving throw, which is also unusual for us. It can go around corners, it covers a massive area, and it can potentially do ongoing damage. And then, of course, the darkness can create a battlefield control as well. And I thought about the final spell for a while, and what I ended up with is Sunburst. So this is another evocation blasting spell. Brilliant sunlight flashes in a 60-foot radius, again, massive. On a point centered we choose within range, and because there's no darkness, we can use our sculpt spells. Each creature in that light must make a constitution saving throw. On a failed save, they take 12d6 radiant damage, which is okay damage for this level, and they're blinded for 1 minute, so that's good. On a successful save, it takes half as much damage and isn't blinded by the spell. Undead and oozes have disadvantage on the saving throw. Creature blinded by this spell can make another constitution saving throw at the end of each of its turns, and it can get rid of the blinded effect. So the blinded effect isn't necessarily lasting for the minute, but it can last for up to a minute. So the reason why I'm choosing this spell is, number one, we can benefit from sculpt spells, so we can cast it and get advantage of that massive area, decent damage, and then potentially the secondary effect of the blinding on top. And of course, radiant damage adds yet another type of damage. So now this character can do fire damage, acid damage, cold damage, lightning damage, psychic damage, radiant damage, and I may have missed some in there as well. Just so many different kinds that no matter what kind of damage we're looking for, we can probably find it. Now we can only prepare 2 more spells. So we need to get rid of a spell. And the spell I'm going to get rid of is Melf's Minute Meteors. I could get rid of Levitate as I talked before, but I just don't see using Melf's Minute Meteors anymore at this level. So that way I can take my Maddening Darkness, my Maze, and my Sunburst, and again, remember, I'm not going to worry about preparing Demiplane normally. So we're going to go to 18th level here, and again, this is another one of those characters where at 17th level, if you wanted to go 3 levels of something else, maybe you do want to take Sorcerer and get some meta magic so that you could cast spells with meta magic on top of them. There's good reason to do that. I'm just going 20 levels of Wizard because these are Wizard characters that are going to be 17 levels of Wizard. I don't see the point in investing in a better Charisma because between 18 to 20, I can do this minor thing. So I think it's just easier to go 20 levels of Wizard if we're planning to play this character from levels 1 through 20. But if I made it as a 20th level character for a one-shot, I might boost the Charisma and then maybe grab 3 levels of Sorcerer. So Spell Mastery is going to let us pick a 2nd level spell and a 1st level spell that we can cast at will. And usually the 2nd level spell I'm going to be taking is Misty Step, and it certainly is in this case as well. And the 1st level spell I pretty much always pick is Shield, and I'm going to pick it in this case as well. Now, if you are a Magic Missile specialist, maybe you want to take Magic Missile there. So now we're going to get 4 9th level spells. As per usual, I'm going to grab Wish and True Polymorph, even though I'm not going to prepare them, because I like to have them in my spell book. They're often useful on off times as well. And then I'm going to add 2 additional spells. The first one, I'm going to add Invulnerability. It's not a spell I normally take, but the idea of being able to make invulnerable characters who walk in and then can blast, I think has greater advantage than other wizards using the invulnerability spell because that concentration is going to be less of a problem. But the big one that I'm probably going to be using with my 9th level slot is Meteor Swarm. So this is the ultimate evocation spell in the game, the ultimate blast spell in the game, and it is a lot better than any other blast spell in the game. It covers a 40-foot radius sphere, so it's huge, and does 40d6 damage. And we can cast this spell up to a mile. And of course, we can use our Sculpt spells with this spell, so we don't have to worry about hitting our allies with it. And it technically benefits from our Empowered Evocation, though that +5 is pretty minor once we're rolling 40d6. The dex save is a 19 for us, and that's a pretty hard save for people to make. Probably going to take 40d6 damage. We can kill some pretty powerful creatures with this. The average damage for 40d6 is 140 points of damage. So that's 140 points of damage on average. Actually, 145 if we add our Empowered Evocation. So 145 points of damage on average to a creature that fails their saving throw. And we should hit many, many creatures with this. If we can hit 10 creatures with this, we're doing over 1,000 points of damage. Now, if they save, they're only taking 72 points of damage. That's still a lot of damage, even if they make their saving throw. But ultimately, we want to hit lots of creatures with this, and ideally, we're going to be hitting powerful minions that have 100+ hit points. We still might drop them with this spell. Now, against single targets, 140 points of damage with a 9th level slot isn't worth it because your opponents at this point have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hit points of damage. So you're not dropping any of the single big toughies with the Meteor Swarm. But we definitely want to catch them in the area because they can't shrug off. 140 points of damage is still a lot of damage. So in terms of preparing, as I mentioned, I'll prepare the Invulnerability and the Meteor Swarm. And I think the Invulnerability, it's just kind of a fun idea. I don't know how much I would use it, but the idea that you could just walk into an enemy complex, no one can hurt you, and you can just boom, 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 especially if you have some like a staff as well to give you more spells. Meteor Swarm is probably the one I would use most just because it's a massive amount of damage over a huge area. And it just eclipses the damage we can do with anything else. Think about Overchannel with Cone of Cold. That was 64 points of damage. And then with Empowered Evocation, that's 69 to 145 points of damage. Meteor Swarm is what we built this character for. So now let's go ahead and jump the character right to level 20. So we're going to get 4 additional spells. Should we take 4 additional 9th level spells? No. This is what happens with characters, is we get our 9th level spells at 17th level, and then at 18th level we're going to get a couple more, and then 19th and 20th level we're going to get more spells regardless. But suddenly we have more 9th level spells than any other spell level, even though we only can cast one 9th level spell. Doesn't make a lot of sense. So you're better off going back and taking lower level spells, maybe ones we didn't take before. I often take water breathing because we don't have to prepare water breathing, so it's a decent spell that we can use as a ritual. I'm going to go back and take that Bigby's Hand I thought about taking before. Why not? We can afford it now. And I'm going to take Plane Shift. Not something that's going to come up a lot, but when I want it, it's good to have it in my spell book. And sometimes I even have the opportunity to rest for a day and then prepare it when I need it. And I'm going to cast Create Homunculus. Again, not something I'm going to use all the time, but I could use this again outside of adventuring. And then I can have that additional companion in addition to my familiar. And I can prepare 2 additional spells at this point, so let's go ahead and add in our Fire Shield, and let's go up and prepare that Demiplane spell. And this is a good opportunity for us to grab that Dimension Door so that we can add it onto a contingency spell. Again, we can't take another person along with us, but when we activate it with contingency, we can't anyways. Now we're going to get another ability score improvement here, and before I took the Alert feat instead of Lucky, so now I'll take the Lucky feat. And then we get our signature spells. These are 2 3rd level spells that we can cast. Somebody reminded me here that it's not just once a day, it's once per short rest we can cast these spells. So we can cast them a little more often. Again, they're 3rd level spells. I don't know how much they're going to come up, but I would probably take Fireball. Just because I think it's appropriate for this character. And then I would take Counterspell because I think it's the one that's more likely to come up. And that is the Evoker up to level 20. So we can really see how the difference in the role of this character affects the spell selection, and it affects how we think about spell slots, because it really does change the game when you cast a Fireball and you use up a 3rd level slot, and then the next round it's gone and you need to do something else. It does affect how those spell slots work out. But if you want to play a blaster, this is the blaster I think you should play. You will find Sculpt Spells is the best ability that a blaster can have in the game. It's better than increasing the damage of an area of effect spell, because the best way to increase the damage of an area of effect spell is to hit more enemies. And if we don't have to worry about positioning because our allies might get hit, we can hit a lot more enemies. So next week we're going to be talking about the Conjurer, and we've got a Summoner build that is going to be a Goblin. So I hope you'll join me for that one. Until then, I'm going to sit back and relax. I'm going to have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, Optimancers. See you next week.